Good morning, Jim, and welcome to the Magic Chats again.
Hey,
It's so
Magic.
great to
Yeah,
talk to you.
thank you so much. Great to see you.
We see a lot of interest in our security discussions, and obviously cybersecurity is a big topic. From the SMB perspective, we spoke about the dangers, of not taking care of cybersecurity. We spoke about the opportunities with the IoT in the cybersecurity, protecting IoT. What is the third area that we need to be very aware and careful when thinking about cybersecurity and the protection of our SMB friends and customers?
Yeah, you hit the key word there, protection, right? So, when we think of cybersecurity, we think of keeping things out or keeping things in. And we all know this, but a really important piece of that protection is being able to recover data. So what we would call data protection, we might have called backup or BCDR in the past. They have lots of different terms, but it continues to grow because where people are putting data and how that data is being leveraged and the security around it are constantly evolving. So we need to kind of look at it a little more holistically as we're going forward.
I see a trend, Jim, to be honest, because I see more and more people in the, let's say, outside of the technology world, because we are living in a bit of a bubble in the technology world. But outside of the technology world, people are starting to appreciate that there is so much data collected about them. The whole artificial intelligence discussion started, more kind of making people more aware of the fact that there is data being collected about them. There is data that is, in their organization that needs to be protected and nurtured. I don't think that people were aware of how important data is and what are some of the consequences of not protecting your data properly.
You hit a really important fact that we don't always talk about, right? Is that, you think about lost data as a time pain, a pain of time, right? Because I have to recreate that information. We typically don't think about data and the loss of how can this harm me when it gets out in the wild? How can it harm my employees or my clients or my upstream vendors, right? Data is really challenging because just like you said, anything that's lost is now lost for good and can be shared amongst a lot of bad actors pretty quickly. So if we have sensitive information, again, about our processes, our company, our clients, our people, that now is ammunition, right, to do other attacks, just like you're talking. They're collecting so much information about us in today's world. And these data losses, we think of we can't recover as being the problem, but losing that information and making them susceptible to attack is one of the real challenges as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the, kind of consequences of losing data.
Yeah, we look at a couple of these stats, and there's a lot of different reports out there, a lot of different versions of kind of the same conversation. But when we look at it, we can kind of break it down into three things, right? We know that a lot of SMBs are faced with this type of issue. They have lost data. 40% of SMBs worldwide reported data loss after an attack. Now, this could be in a lot of different fashions. Maybe they had a ransomware attack and they either paid or didn't pay the ransom, but they couldn't recover all of that information. Or the data was technically stolen, right? And they weren't able to get it back for some reason. But at the end of the day, 40% is a huge number for attacks. We also know that the cost of downtime is getting more and more expensive all the time, even for small businesses. We are so heavily connected in our world, and hours without that connection to the outside world or our internal employees is extremely expensive. And then there's that final effect, whether it's credibility, whether it's lost revenue, whether it's lost contracts. When we have a data loss, our customers typically find out. And this can really wreak havoc on our long-term business prospects, resulting in significant business closures when they have that data loss event.
Of course, we hear recently more and more about, certain companies not being able to service their customers. And we see how much this hurts the credibility, the productivity of the organizations. It's amazing. Not even losing the data, but losing an access to the data is extremely painful, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It comes in different waves on how painful it can be depending on the type of data. There's some data where it can really stop, it can stop production. It can stop our communication. Then there's other data that's extremely sensitive, either on the internal or client side, that can truly harm credibility. Like if you're trusting me with your information and then I release it out to the rest of the world, you're likely not as super excited to share more information with me.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Recently, there is a famous story about some of the Italian. When I was going to Italy, they always asked me to make a photo of my ID. I always pushed back on this, and now I've learned that I was right, because there was a data leakage, from the systems of the system that is collecting the data from the hotels. I can only imagine how upset the customers are for those hotel owners, because they leaked the not through their kind of an action, but they leaked the data about their customers to the outside. Very, very big credibility loss.
And one of hundreds of them that are going on all the time, if not thousands, right? It's a real challenge. So yeah, one point is specifically painful, and we think about losing those really sensitive things like pictures of our IDs or our passports or all the different numbers that are associated with us. Yeah, it's definitely a scary thing.
We spoke about. I think that SMB customers are getting more and more aware of the fact that the data is being collected, but I am not really sure if they understand where this data is ending up. Whereas, what are the kind of buckets of data or areas where the data about them is stored?
Yeah, it's interesting. We typically talk about data living in 3 different locations. And a lot of times we're focused on this from the backup and data protection side of things, because as a VAR, as a vendor, as an MSP, we want to make sure we can control and protect as much data as possible for the business. We'll typically look at that on the left here. Data IT controls, and that IT can be MSPs, VARs can be a lot of different, even internal IT. And that's the traditional laptop, desktop servers, even Microsoft 365 or network storage. So we understand that world, and we're actually pretty good at protecting and backing that up. We've been doing that for a long time. There's always misses and always challenges, but we have that pretty well. Over the last decade.
Go ahead, yeah. And I think from the SMB customer perspective, this is the data that is more, kind of expected or visible or understood, correct? Because this is the stuff that you have on your laptop. This is the stuff that you have in your organization, on the server, on your OneDrive, on your some kind of a Dropbox. That's the data that is somehow people are aware that it exists. And
Absolutely.
it's being kind of controlled by your IT or your outsourced IT, which is the managed service provider.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, this is the stuff we think about when we start talking about recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives. How long can you be down? We focus on this data almost holistically. One thing that that we came up with most recently is we found out there's roughly 200 zettabytes of data out in the business world today. And I might have talked about this before, but half of that sits on premise in locations and half of that is in the cloud. So when we look at the stuff that IT controls, at least half of it is protected already. But then there's that percentage of that other 100 zettabytes, which is a lot of data, right? That is somewhere else. And we may control some of those like Microsoft 365, but that middle column is like what you're talking about. It's not the data we think about when we think, where's our data located? How do I protect it? How do I secure it? And this is going to be all those other SaaS applications where we are not in the backup and recovery process itself. So we take, whether it's a hosted financial application, maybe an EMR solution, electronic medical records, it's something in that world that has very sensitive and business data in it that we're trusting the vendor to secure and be able to restore.
Yes, it's when you sign up with a legal company, they'll start storing data about you. When you sign up with a medical company, they will start storing. But when you sign up with maybe your I don't know, accounting, when you outsource accounting, they will start collecting and processing data about you, about your company, very detailed information about your company.
Yes, very sensitive, right? Yeah. And so we got to say, well, how is that information protected from those companies that are collecting that information? And this is the real area of opportunity that we see coming in the near future for VARs, for vendors, for managed service providers, and internal IT. How do we get our arms around that sensitive business information that is stored in others' facilities? A lot of times when I sign up for a new SaaS application, that has solved my problem. So I move on to something else and I don't think of, I wonder how this is recovered. I wonder how they're using AI. I wonder how secure this is. And so this is the opportunity area for these engaged IT providers to say, let's research your SaaS applications, understand the cybersecurity solutions they have in place, understand how they're using AI and what their recovery times are. When we're saying that, we have that arrow at the bottom saying, how do we shift that data protection or at least that knowledge under IT's control? And that's kind of an open area where we've always hidden from, I should say.
But I think also the third pillar is extremely interesting because like I work for a very large corporation, and I know that there's in a large corporations many times people tell me I cannot access my personal email. I cannot, my USB, is blocked. I cannot enter any USB storage into my USB port, right? I cannot use a personal workstation. I need to use the company. It's pretty popular in the very large organizations. I don't think that this kind of a unknown control bucket is well covered and understood in the SMB space.
Oh, yeah. And that's one reason why this is so if the middle column is our opportunity, the right column is our concern, because we know there are some protective measures in that middle column, but on that right, it's a real risk.
It's the Dropbox of of somebody that has installed it because it's a personal thing, right? It's your personal email that you are using to send, company information. That's the stuff that is extremely difficult, and it's actually many times not even visible for the owner of the organization. Correct?
You're absolutely describing this perfectly, because this is the risk. This is where we're saying, as an employee, I'm either going to do a workaround with something because I have technology in place that stops me from doing it the way I want to. So I'll send it to a personal Dropbox. I'll send it to a personal email, and then I'll do what I want with it afterwards. But you're right. As soon as it hits those, I have zero visibility, zero control. And just like you said, there's a lot of solutions in place that can really put a halt to that unknown control. Stopping USB drives from being able to transfer data is kind of, just like you said, most large organizations are already doing that. I know I can't plug in a USB stick into my ConnectWise laptop and pull data off because they understand the risk there. But then it's starting to block those personal access sites also, building policies around it. And this is always going to evolve over time, but we have the tools and the technology in place to mitigate this pretty well. It's just like you said, implementing that in the small business world is a little more challenging.
So the idea is that, as much as possible of the data should be under the governance of the IT organization, or in the SMB space, it's typically the MSP, which is a huge opportunity for the MSPs to kind of go and work with the SMB customers to understand the risk and the challenges, and potentially expand the services beyond the simple data protection into this data that vendors control, and also tools and services that kind of cover or reduce the unknown control in the customer. That's the direction that we need to push.
Perfect way to state that. Yeah. So stuff we control, we're doing pretty good. The data that vendors control, we want to at least get the knowledge around that so we can describe, hey, here's what happens if that data is lost, encrypted, stolen. We need to understand what they're going to do and help SMBs understand it. And then put the tools in place to block that unknown control so that data always stays at least in our purview.
Excellent. We know, kind of where the data could be leaving. How to protect it properly?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I know that we had a minute talking about this earlier, and it's still kind of, I don't want to say well known, like everybody should know this, but we've been using this term for quite a while, 3-2-1. When we talk about protecting data, we want to at least at a minimum follow 3-2-1. There's other numbered systems like 3-2-1-1-0. There's lots of different ones, but this one's the simplest and easiest to follow. We want to have 3 copies of our data on 2 different medias or platforms, and at least one being far away or offsite, right? Whether you're completely on premise or whether you're completely in the cloud, or like most of us, you have some sort of hybrid, we want to make sure every piece of our data follows at least this standard. Now we add that plus on there because what we know is 97% of the time when there's a breach or an attack, bad actors go after the backups. They want to make it so you can't restore the data yourself. It almost guarantees that ransom payment. So proper security and configuration of that backup solution is really critical. We want to make sure we're using things like air gap that we talk about, or immutable storage, or secondary authentication mechanisms for these backup solutions, so that just because my production environment got breached doesn't mean my backup environment gets breached.
I need to review my backup policy, my own backups policy, because yes, having an offsite copy or air gapped, it's something that many people, I think, neglect. And it's extremely important because those cyber criminals, they will try to, they know that you will restore. So if there is an access to your stuff, they'll figure it out and they'll access it and address it as well. Correct?
Absolutely. In my days in MSP, I remember going on site with a customer who had good backups, but they were fully encrypted because they were on the same network. And so we couldn't restore that data without paying a ransom. And, we got called in after the encryption happened. So we were helping them go through the process, but this happens more than we want it to. So we need solutions in place that automate that air gap and immutability into the solution that's just part of the product, so we don't have to be concerned about that as much in the future.
I remember the stories of companies that lost access that were encrypted. Not a very pretty stories, unfortunately. We spoke about it at the very beginning of our conversation, but I still have in front of me a good friend of mine, Aaron, from Helystorm. It's a great MSP from California, and he was at one of the HPE events talking about the customers that he has seen that haven't properly protected their data, and what kind of a nervous breakdowns or emotional breakdowns they were going through when they learned that they just lost an access to everything. So 3-2-1, it's a very, very good strategy.
Yeah, we've kind of proven it out several times that by following this and properly securing that, you can really count on your backup system to recover data for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Have you got any examples, maybe make it a little bit more visual, what it means, how would it work, this 3-2-1 implementation?
Yeah, really good question. When we look at this, and this looks like the on-premise copy, but I just want to make sure we're clear that whether you're in the cloud or hybrid or on-premise 100%, we're still going to follow this 3-2-1 rule. We still want 3 copies of that data. So in this instance, we have our production, our local backup, and our offsite backup, kind of the standard legacy 3-2-1 for on-premise data. A couple of challenges here that we talked about, that geographic distance. We said air gap, and we said, we want to make sure we have something offsite. 15 years ago, this was hard, so maybe even 20 years ago, this was hard because we didn't have the connectivity. We had to ship things. We had to manually move tapes as we, used to have to do. In today's world, this is as easy as it can get. You connect a resource from another geography and you push data to it. As long as it's in your compliance region. If you have some compliance issues, we have to consider that. But geographic distance is no longer a major barrier. The barriers we do run into is how to continually capture data. We know that businesses are adding more applications and they're using more storage inside those applications. So they're applying more data. So always capturing that information even in that unknown or vendor controlled area when we can, is really important. So having processes around finding where data lives continuously so we're not surprised is a challenge that we have to make sure we're continually working through. In addition on this, what if we did have a breach? And we've already went into this, so I won't go super deep. We want to make sure that immutability is there in our backup solutions. What this means is even if a bad actor gets on our network and they attempt to delete the data, they won't be able to do it. And this is the real key here, because we can never guarantee that a service or that a bad actor isn't going to get on a network and break through our security. What we want to do is make it so they can't delete or encrypt that data. And that's where immutability comes in. And the last real question is, can I restore information in the time frame a business needs? I talk about this in almost every one of my data protection talks. When I was in the MSP world, all businesses would say, oh, I can be down for 24 hours. So we would build the 24-hour restoration system. And as soon as something went down, they'd be like, okay, I need this back up in 2 hours. I have a big shipment going out. And you're like, well, we didn't design that system based on the information. So we started pushing back after we learned this, but making sure we can restore in the time frame the business truly needs is an important feature we got to make sure we're capturing. You know,
let's take it yes to understand it in the most popular environments that we know, which is the Microsoft environment, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So when we look at that kind of middle tier, like data we control, but we're still trying to understand this, large business has this down pretty well. Small business, I think we still have some education to do on where responsibility lands. And so this is the Microsoft Shared Responsibility Matrix. And what a lot of people don't know is that when you sign up for a Microsoft 365, and again, we're just using this as one example, right? Every one of your SaaS applications might be a little bit different. But when you sign up for Microsoft 365, you're agreeing to a few things. Number one, you're agreeing to be responsible for data protection. Now, they have copies of data that you can restore, but if you really want to follow 3-2-1, if you really want to be in control of the restoration, you have to do a third-party backup solution for this. You're responsible for it. They're very clear on this, but we don't always understand that because we don't read every line of the agreements. MSPs know this, and so they're selling cloud backup, but SMBs don't always know this. In addition, we have the responsibility of securing accounts. And so we think of the Microsoft platform. Microsoft is responsible for securing the platform itself. So hackers can't get into the universal undercode that is part of Microsoft 365. But as far as Magic's account or Jim's account, we're responsible for the security of that. They're not. So we got to understand also that when we look at things like multi-factor authentication, data loss prevention, how we keep data inside, all these configuration settings are things that we have to do. And it gives us an opportunity to say, how am I going to cyber secure this environment? But also, how am I going to provide that data protection to make sure we can restore?
Yes, the account story is always puzzling me a lot, because I see people using their Microsoft account to log into so many different things, and then using the same password for their Microsoft account, the Google account, or for the login to email, and maybe a few other things. But I always say that the account, and this is what I was trying to teach my kids as well, your account information is a bit of a passport in a digital world. So if you are kind of not taking care of your passport, you could basically lose it, and somebody will be using your identity to access maybe some other things, maybe the things that you wouldn't like to, or will use your access to the things that are yours, pretending it's you, and it's a very, very dangerous situation.
It's absolutely true. And, lots of times our email system itself is the central repository. I think about a lot of different applications, whether you have a financial application, personal even, that you likely use your email for that. So what happens when you want to reset the password? Well, if you have true multi-factor setup everywhere and protection mechanisms in place, you shouldn't be able to use one point of entry to access everything else. But it's a real challenge because a lot of small businesses still push back on multi-factor authentication, still push back on methods to secure accounts. And when we know it's our responsibility, Hopefully that'll open some eyes saying Microsoft isn't doing this for you. And again, Microsoft is just one example. We look at all of our SaaS applications in this light. They're not doing the security for you as a person. We have to make sure we're doing it right ourselves.
But email is not the only location where the data resides in the Microsoft environment, correct?
Oh, you're absolutely right. This is probably one of my favorite topics to really talk about when it comes to SaaS applications. And Microsoft 365, again, easy to understand because a lot of us use it. And if you're using Google Workspace, it's a similar conversation. We don't just keep email in there, as everybody knows. We keep our files, we keep our communication, our sharing, our collaboration. All of that is under one, what we think of as an umbrella, but it's really multiple applications inside that Microsoft 365 world. And we need to make sure we're protecting data on all of them across the board. If we just didn't back up the inbox and protect it, well, we can restore that information, but the future attacks are going to be in the SharePoint environment and in the Teams environment and OneDrive. We have to make sure we can restore that data properly, specifically using things like 321.
Yeah, so and I think, like, people forget it because, like, what is the difference between a SharePoint and a OneDrive? Well, there is one. There is a lot, right? Actually, differences. And the fact that you have something on your OneDrive doesn't mean that you have protected everything that you have on a SharePoint. And they are connected, but they are not the same. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Really important piece too. I'm glad you brought that up, Magic, because that's a really important distinction. You can have different security laid out for SharePoint and OneDrive. As an example, I could share with you a file from my OneDrive, but not be able to share it from SharePoint. While they're the same underlying technology, I can do rights differently and options differently. So lots of little details that go down to how you granularly configure security and data protection are really important.
And frankly saying, it's getting more and more complex because, now you have the Teams groups that generate files that are stored on a SharePoint-like, access. And, well, yeah. And people have a OneDrive for business, but on the same laptop, they can have also their personal OneDrive. And they try to many times mix, the storage, like putting stuff on one that should belong to the other one. It's getting very, very, very difficult, and it will require a lot of attention from the MSPs to make sure that the SMBs, not for the malicious reason, but just for the lack of knowledge, don't mess around with all this stuff by themselves.
Super important. Yeah, you think of all these. I can have the same document in all three locations. Which one's the primary? Which one's secured? And they can be secured differently. So yeah, you're really hitting all the good stuff today because it is a concern. So.
But if I understand correctly, ConnectWise supports the MSPs with a platform or tools and systems that help to protect across different dimensions and different products, right?
Absolutely. ConnectWise was founded really on helping MSPs operate their business, kind of the original solution when we look at things like PSA, Automate, RMM, and what you used to call manage, right? But in today's world, we want to be more holistic. So we have a data protection platform that we offer to MSPs to help make sure we do a great job of being able to restore data when they need it. We look at the traditional models like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, and then the on-premise equipment as well. We do offer 3 products. I won't go into super depth on them, but we can back up the cloud environments. We can back up the on-prem. We can do that immutable, that air gap, kind of everything you're talking about, because it really is fundamental. I talked about that first pillar being the easy one, but in all honesty, a lot of SMBs still struggle in that area. We want to make sure that that's 100% protected before we start moving out to the other pillars, and we can help with that.
This is really good, and I know it's the products on the platform. There are also products that that you support that are external, from the third-party vendors that are also kind of well connected to the overall ConnectWise platform and kind of it's a bit of a competition and collaboration, if I understand correctly. So like every dimension is possible here, if I understand it correctly.
Oh, you hit it right. So we have our 3 products: ConnectWise Cloud Backup, X360 Recover, X360 Cloud. But we also work with Acronis and Veeam and lots of other solutions, either in a licensed or even a co-managed model. So if, let's say, you want to protect all your clients, but you want to use your backup engineer to start having conversations about managed information versus data protection, we can step in and help manage those services and help scale.
Or maybe the customer has a standard that they want to preserve, okay, and you need to you have to integrate it, into the other areas and other dimensions. So I think this is a great opportunity to build this integration with whatever the customer requires to use.
Perfect example. Appreciate that. Yes, exactly.
Jim, thank you so much. We're gonna speak again in a couple of weeks about the next topics. But today, I think we have a good understanding of why data is so important, where it lives, how to protect it, and what are the solutions that can be used to address this very important topic.
Well, thank you for taking the time and inviting me on. I appreciate the conversation, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm typically pretty amped up to have a data protection conversation.
Thank you so much, Jim, and speak to you soon.
Thank you, Magic.
Bye.